catching these small ones. Hey guys, this is Gene Jensen with BassResource.com. Today let's talk about how to choose, or the considerations you go through to choose the right hook for your soft plastics. I've got a Carolina rig here with a trick worm, but I'm going to talk about that here real quick, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit of something. Let's see. All right, the question that gets asked a lot is, what size hook do I use for a certain size worm? Is there an exact size for that worm? The answer is no. It is according to personal preference. I'm going to tell you what my preference is, and kind of go over what the different how I go about choosing that hook for that worm, and I also choose it for the rod I'm using and the line I'm using too. So let's go over that. First of all, you have several different. Now there's worms that have lots of different thicknesses. Okay, and this is when you start talking about the extra wide gap hooks and things like that. All right, what I got here is I've got a tube. See how thick that tube is? And this has already got a tube hook in it, but anyway, see how thick that tube is? I'm going to choose an extra wide gap hook for that tube. That way I'm guaranteed a good hook set. Okay, I'm going to be a smart guy and get out a different tube and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm going to take a 4/0 hook. That's the most popular size hook, is a 4/0. I'm going to lay it alongside that thing, and I'm going to see where it comes to, the total size of it, okay? And I want the gap, which is from the point to the furthest part away of the shank of the hook, I want the gap to be almost double what the thickness is, okay? So what happens when a fish bites? I'll hook this up real quick. It's hard to do on a dry worm or dry tube. But anyway, so what happens when a fish bites on this tube, on any worm, is it bites and that tube has got to get out of the way. The worm's got to get out of the way, and you've got to have a business end to the point. If you use too small of a hook, say for instance a 2/0 hook, this is also a wide gap, but it's a 2/0 wide gap. Okay. Not a whole lot of bite there, not a whole lot of space to get that, to hook that fish. I'm not going to use a 2/0 hook for that thick worm. I'm not going to use an offset hook for the same reason. Okay, look, for the same reason I'm not going to use that offset hook, because when it squishes down, there's not going to be a whole lot of room to get a good hook set on the fish. Okay. Now, the exception, for me at least, and those who have seen my fluke video, is a super fluke. A super fluke has this nice little slit cut in it, okay? So in essence, the thickness of that soft plastic is only as thick as from the very inside of that slit to the back. So it's only about that thick. So when you run a hook into it, and the fish bites, that's how much bite you have. Okay, that's plenty. That's why I use a round bend, because I get a round bend offset, because I get a better hook set. Now, one of the things I do a little bit differently a lot of times is well, look, I want the most action I can get out of some of my worms, especially the straight worms. Okay, like the trick worms. I'm going to go with the smallest hook I can get away with. I like a 2/0 hook with a trick worm. A lot of people will use a 4/0. Just understand that the larger the hook, the less action you're going to get with that worm. Okay, I caught my personal best on a trick worm with, I know I have them. There they are. On a trick worm with that hook. This is a number 1 offset worm hook. Okay, it was a 9.98, and that's the size hook I was using to get the maximum action out of that trick worm. Risky, yeah, but it worked. See, you got that much bite. Not a whole lot of bite. It was a little risky. The smaller the hook, the more action you get. Now, you got to also consider the gauge of the wire that the hook is made out of. For instance, my 2-aught hook compared to my 4-aught hook. Okay, that 4-aught hook is considerably thicker in wire gauge than that 2-aught hook. Okay, so if I'm using a medium fast action rod with 20-pound test or even 15-pound test line, I don't necessarily want to use a 2-aught hook unless I keep in mind on my hook sets that I'm using one and I don't have to set the hook as hard. What happens if you set the hook too hard with a too stiff of a rod and too big a line? It bends that hook out and you lose a fish. Okay, so for big heavy, flipping hooks and things like that, shoot, look at these flipping hooks. You get some decent ones. Flipping hooks, nice, big, thick hook. 50-pound test braid, so on and so forth. And it won't bend out. But the thinner the wire, the more chance you have of bending it out. So understand that if I'm going to use a thin wire hook, I'm going to go with a medium action rod, and then with that medium action rod, I'm going to go with lighter line because it's just the line matches the rod anyway. That's it. That's how I choose. You want the most action, or do you want the best bite? One thing I have noticed before I quit is that when you're dragging a long worm, like I fish with 10-inch worms. With a 10-inch worm, I'll still use a 4-aught hook, because 9 times out of 10, those big bass, the ones you're after, the reason you're using a 10-inch worm is that big bass will grab a hold of the head of that worm, and I mean, it's 99% of the time he grabs hold of the head of that worm, and that's where your hook is. Okay. Like I always say, visit bassresource.com for the answer to all your questions about bass fishing, and have a great day.